Hello, my dear friends. We are waiting with bated breath for the release of hostages to begin, hopefully, as planned, this coming Sunday. As Torah observant Jews, we look in the Torah to gain insight and understanding in the events of our lives. The Torah is known as Torah, we refer to it in davening, Torah's Chaim, a living Torah. It's living because, although it's a document that was written 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, but it's alive. We constantly have new insight. It's not a dead document. It's because it's God's word. And therefore, there always has to be something new in Torah, and a new perspective, a new insight. And in particular, the Torah gives us an understanding or a prism to understand the events of our lives and what our purpose is in the world. The Parasha of Shavua in particular, many of us far and right, should be, when a person studies the Parasha of Shavua, a person should say to himself, what does this Parasha say to me in a contemporary way? What does it teach me that's relevant to my life today? So I want to make an observation about how Parasha Shemos, that's what we're going to read this week. What is Parasha Shemos? How does it speak to us about the situation with the hostages in Gaza? The Parasha begins, V'egel Shemos b'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Yaakov. And then it goes on to list the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes, and it tells us their names. So the question is, we know their names. If you read Parashas, it tells you each one of the children when they were born and what their name was, and we know that there's 12. Why repeat it? So Rashi asks this question, and Rashi says that it teaches that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves the Jewish people because he calls them by name and he counts the Jewish people over and over again. And Rashi says it's similar to what God does with the stars. The stars, the pasuk says in Yeshaya, Hamotzi b'mispar tzva'am. God takes out the hosts of the stars in the sky. He brings them out by number. In other words, God counts the stars when he allows them to emerge at night. L'chulam b'shem yikra. And each one has a name. God has a name for every single star. So there's a bunch of questions. First of all, what's the relationship between the Jewish people and star? Why are they compared to, they're compared, Rashi says, because they're counted, have names. What's the underlying connection between stars and people? And secondly, why does God count the stars? There's, I think the number is 10 to the 20th power. A billion, trillion, skillion, there's not even a way to describe it, except by saying to the power. What difference does it make how many there are? If it would be 10 trillion or 11 trillion or 5 trillion. There's so many stars. You can't even see all the stars. And if God would count the stars, and God counts every single star. So if he misses one, does it make any difference? And secondly, why does every star have a name? Why should a star have a name? I understand people, you give names, so you have a way of referring to them. But why does the God, there's stars, there's just so many stars, and they all look the same. They're like a speck of light in the sky. So why does every star have its own name? So the answer is that when something is important, number one, you count it. Every single one is diamonds. You don't put a bunch of diamonds in a bag and say, I got 5 pounds of diamonds. You could do that with potatoes. You don't do that with diamonds. Every single diamond is a jewel, a gem is important. So and secondly, so when you're dealing with people, every person has to be counted separately. You don't lump them together, lump sum. And secondly, each one has to have a name because a name is a sign of importance. But the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, they wanted to take away the identity of every Jew. So they, instead of using their names, they identified them by numbers. That's why RPRY has a program, beautiful program, names and not numbers. It dehumanizes a person when you give them, when you refer to them as a certain number. Every Jew has a name. It's given when a boy is born, it's by the bris. When a girl is born, it's by when the father has an aliyah, gives a name by the Kriyas HaTorah. Every single person deserves to have a name. And the connection to stars is that you look at the stars from afar. The stars look like they're not important. They look like just mass. If it's a clear night, you can see a lot of stars. So maybe you can see 5,000 stars. They all look the same. They're just little tiny specks. That's because you're far away. But when you get up close, you see every star is amazing. It's a whole almost like a universe. How big is a star compared to the Earth? The sun is 1.3 million times larger in volume than the Earth. It's incredible. And the sun is a small star. There's a larger stars that are 100 times the size of the sun. So each star is an entire world, and therefore it's deserving of a name. Now, we don't know why each star has its own name, but if God created so many stars, there's a reason for each star. Otherwise, why did he make them? Why do you have to make billions, trillions to the 10 to the 20th power of stars? So each star has to have a purpose. So if it has a purpose, it has to have a name to show its chashivas and significance. And therefore, by counting the Jewish people one by one, and by naming each one, that God is showing the enormous value of each individual. And that's an introduction to Sefer Shemos, to this portion of this week's Parasha, and it's also the whole Sefer of Shemos, because in Shemos, the Jews go into slavery, and they lose their identity, and they lose their importance. A slave has no identity of its own. It's totally subservient to it doesn't matter what the slave wants or what he cares about or his opinion. He's just at the master's, the whim of the master. So the Torah is saying, even though the Jews went into slavery for 210 years, but they didn't lose their chashivas, they didn't lose their identity, they didn't lose their value. They're still counted, and they still have a name. So every single hostage, even though they were taking hostages together, there was a few hundred hostages. Every single hostage is super important and valuable, and it's a whole world. And the amount of suffering that every hostage went through, we can't even conceive of the pain and the trauma and the agony and not knowing what the end will be, and it's still not resolved. And the pain for the family, for parents, for children, for siblings, for friends. Every single hostage has its own name and his own number, because they're like an entire world unto themselves, and that's how we have to relate to them. And it's so, as each one is going to emerge, it's going to be such an enormous simcha that they will finally be released from captivity. I would like to point out an observation that I had this week about the names. The relevant to what I just said, when people text me, I get maybe 50 texts a day, I don't know, something like that, between texts and emails. Oftentimes, people don't use your name. So I got a text this week from somebody, and he texts me, he says, "Is this product okay?" He doesn't say who he is. I don't have him in my contacts. I need to know who I'm talking to, because my answer sometimes, I have to know who the person is. Sometimes if I'm dealing with a certain type of person, I'll be more lenient. Sometimes I'll be a little more strict. I need to have a perspective. So I asked the person, before I answer this question, who do I have the pleasure of speaking to? So he texts me back his name, and I said, do you live in this neighborhood? He says, no, I live out in Nevada someplace. I say, do I know you? No, but I heard about you because my cousin's sister's brother's uncle knows you, that you worked in the OU. I didn't want to insult the person, but I would have liked to have asked him, why don't you use my name? That's such a normal thing when you're talking, a total stranger. He sends me a text that says, like I'm an information bureau. I'm part of the computer, like a computer. You you Google something, you find the answer. I'm not Google. I'm a person. I don't care really. I'm not upset at all. I think it's an insight into something that's pervasive in our culture, that we don't use people's names anymore. We write letters to people. It used to be in the olden days, those of you who are as old as me, you remember when we used to write letters on paper with a pen, and we put it in an envelope with a stamp, and we mailed it, and a letter meant something, but nobody in the world would think of starting a letter, hey, tell me, what's the story with this? You address a person by their name, because people are important and they deserve that respect and that kavod. I'm super careful when I send a text message. I try, sometimes maybe I forget, but I try to always start with the person's name. And even if the person texts me, doesn't use my name, I begin the text with their names. That's a way of showing respect to the person. The Gemara says you have to mikabel kol adam b'sever panim yafos. Every person has to be greeted with a smile. Why every person? Why there's so many people? Everybody I meet, I have to smile? Yeah, because every person is an entire world. Every person is like a star. And therefore, every person deserves that respect that you should use the person's name. You know, one of my favorite books that I read when I was a teenager is Dale Carnegie's book, How to Make Friends and Influence Them. I was so impressed by what he wrote. Brilliant insight. And he talked about how one of the most important things for every person is their name. When you talk to somebody, use their name, because people feel good when you use a name. Now, there's an enormous difference between the reason why Dale Carnegie wants you to use or recommends using a name and the point that I'm making now. And that is, for Dale Carnegie, it's a way of making friends and influencing them. If you want to win somebody over, use their name. If you want them to feel that they're going to be receptive to what you want, so call them by their name. My point is nothing to do with what do I get from it. It's what they get from it. As Jews, we need to find ways always to make people feel good, to bring happiness into people's lives, to treat people with the respect that they deserve. And therefore, when we're talking to somebody, to shower a person with the respect that they deserve, that's why we have to use the person's name. Not because I want to influence them and not because I care, but because we want the person to feel good. And it's like the aleph ways of showing kavod to another individual. Who's respected? It's somebody who respects others. We have to treat people with respect. I've talked about this before. I'm advocating again. It's Parasha Shemos. It's an appropriate place to talk about it. The Torah uses the names of the Jew, even though God knows their names and God has already shared their names, but the Torah repeats their names because every person is like a star, and God uses the names for every star. So if God can use the name for every star, so when we send a text message to somebody, we should have at the very least the respect of the other individual. Use the person's name. It makes a person feel significant and special and important that you're addressing them with their names. In any event, every single hostage that's coming, that will be freed, it's going to be such an enormous simcha. The heart of the Jewish people has been bleeding these last 15 months for every single one. And the truth is that this shows the greatness of Klal Yisrael. Mika Amcha Yisrael. We don't know most of us don't know any of the hostages, but people have their posters in front of their houses, and we're davening for the hostages every single day, 3 times a day. We're saying Tehillim, and we're thinking about them all the time, and even more so than in the diaspora in Eretz Yisrael. It's the whole nation is living the trauma of the hostages, and that's because for Klal Yisrael, every single person is enormously important. There's been hostages in America. There was the hostage crisis in 1979. There were 54 Americans who were taken hostage by Iranian students. I'm sure that the people in America identified with their pain, but I think that the way Klal Yisrael has identified with the pain of the hostages in Gaza is just, it's beyond belief. It's a reflection of the greatness of Klal Yisrael. It's a Jewish value. Israel is a Jewish state, and there are people that are more observant and less observant. But the value system in Israel is so Jewish. It's a Jewish values. I've said before that if I go onto a bus in Israel or a train, in 10 seconds or even less, people stand up for me, even though I'm not that old. You see, I have a red beard and red hair. So what am I? I look like I'm 42, right? But as soon as I walk in the bus, they jump up. More than one person comes. They'll come running to me from the back of the bus to say, take my seat. In America, I could walk into a subway and stand there, subway car, and stand there the whole day, and nobody will give me a seat. I am not, Baruch Hashem, I'm able to stand. I'm not that old. But it's because the value, and there's signs. It's on the walls of the bus and the train. Stand up for elderly. Where did that come from? It's a pasuk in Chumash. It's a Jewish value. The Jewish value is that every single person is important, and we have to feel other people's pain. And that's what has been taking place in Israel the last 15 months. The identification, the commiseration with the pain and the suffering of every single Hashish, because every single one and every single family is so super important. They're an infinity. They're stars. Even from the distance, we feel close to them and we appreciate their greatness, and therefore we treat them in the appropriate way. Let us hope in Mirz Hashem we should be able to, in the Hallel, we say, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. We recite Hallel on Pesach, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. When the Jewish people went out of Mitzrayim, and every time we recite Hallel, we repeat that. It was a time of celebration. B'tzeis Yisrael, when the Jews left Mitzrayim. Let's hope in Mirz Hashem that there should be a complete return of all the hostages, quickly and swiftly, and they should be able to recover from the most unbelievable trauma that they've experienced in their lives. So we should be able to say Hallel to the Rebbeinu Shalom, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, when the Jews come out of the Mitzrayim, of the Gehenim of Gaza, and wherever else they're held in captivity. And in Mirz Hashem, we should be able to celebrate together the Yeshuas, the salvation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will provide for Klal Yisrael. Thank you for listening, and have a good Shabbos.